I'd like to thank and introduce today one of the leading lights of the FASD community, Brian Roberts. Brian is one of the UK's leading independent consultants and trainers on supporting vulnerable and traumatised children and young people. He has a wealth of experience with over 30 years as a local authority foster carer. Now, Brian, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's a real pleasure to see you here. I've met you on a number of occasions. And what I really would like to start with, if I may, is can you give us an insight into some of your experience, your background into working with supporting vulnerable and traumatized young children and adults?
Yeah, I can do that. It really all started out by accident, I guess. I am a trained secondary teacher, and I had an aspiration of being a secondary head teacher and never really managed to achieve that. What I did do over 30 years ago, as you said, was marry into fostering. And that was something that was different. My wife used to run a children's home for a local authority, and she'd had all her experience up in there in residential social care. Bedfordshire wanted to close that children's home and, in fact, all their children's homes at that stage. So she took on a family of 5 Bangladeshi children 30 years ago as a foster carer. One of those girls was in my tutor group in the 6th form, and I married into fostering. So neither of us went into fostering in a conventional way. And we also started off with people from a totally different culture to us. So that was our way in as well. They were orphans, so you didn't have all the things with contact, which lots of people on here will understand. And so that made the journey into fostering much easier. We're still in touch with all of those, so that's something. We got grandchildren from them because we're their only family. Moving on from that, over 20 years ago, we'd moved most of those original 5 onto theirs. So we were asked to take one girl for one night only. And George came to us on the 23rd of September 2003. A date still etched in my mind because although I was a teacher and a trained foster carer, actually George and her 2 sisters, which eventually came back to us, taught me more about the brain and the challenges that young people faced. Obviously, as a foster carer with my own children in my own school who were a different culture to me, all the other kids in care came to talk to me about their experience of being in care and assumed that I knew everything, and I knew very little when I was originally a foster carer. With George and her 2 sisters, we tried for about 4 years for the good enough parenting that you would normally do, and didn't make the inroads. And they were about to go for an adoption, although they never actually had anyone come forward for 3 of them, aged then, I guess, about 11 and 8 and 5. But the person doing the adoption medical said, find out what mum was drinking when she was pregnant. We looked at each other because that's all they said, and started our journey in 2007 into the FASD world. At the same sort of time, because I was in education and in social care, the assistant director asked me to try and join up those 2 parts of Bedfordshire, which we didn't do, but I realised how important it was. And I went back to my school and said, I want to be a virtual head. They said, well, you can't be Bedfordshire's because you're a foster carer with Bedfordshire. I said, well, I'll go elsewhere. And within the term, I was Dudley's on the national pilot in Dudley in the West Midlands. And then I came back to Peterborough as virtual head. At the same time, I was working for KCA on trauma-informed practice, attachments aware schools program, sexualized behaviour, all the kind of vulnerabilities that children meet. And then I think we'll probably get into talking about later on. I've become more and more involved in the FASD world through, well, you can see it behind me, National FASD, me and my FASD, which was our baby that came out of lockdown, to be honest. We'd had a little money from the Department of Health, and it was to run support groups for face-to-face groups and a bit of training. But the same month as we got the money, we all went into lockdown, so we went onto line, and we'll talk about that later on.
Indeed. I'm I'm really interested because I know there are many foster carers and adoptive families that will be attending this webinar. We today have had our family support group, our monthly family support group, and most of those are special guardianship, foster carers, and those that are newly adopted families as well. And I was interested there because I can concur. My learning curve when I first became a foster carer, there I was a selfish classical guitarist, and I married into my wife who wanted to go into child psychology. Ended up it was too expensive to go down that road for us at that time, and they said, if you want to have an impact on a kid's life, a dramatic impact on a kid's life, go into foster care. So we did. And one of the things, it was for me, it was the steepest learning curve. And when you say that as well, I think because we've been fostering for over 20 years, you've been 30 years, you go into fostering, you go into adoption with the very best intentions. And then you learn so much about yourselves in your learning curve. Can you tell me and tell our foster carers, adoptive families, what was some of the steepest learning curves that you had to face?
I think the one, and don't forget, I've been embedded in social care teams, and we're special guardians for, well, Callum, our 15-year-old, and also we were for our girls. They're now over 18, so they still live with us, but not under any official order. I think the steepest one was the impacts that were going on in families that I didn't know about. Now, it may well be that primary teachers know more about those impacts, but as a secondary teacher, you were kind of one step away from that. And I think it always worries me that, you know, sometimes some of the experiences and the experiences for our girls and Callum and people I'm still supporting, because I'm supporting a lot of people, are really dire. And actually the change that you can make. One of my training slides, one of the first ones, starts with a C.S. Lewis comment, which is, you can't change what has happened, but you can make a difference going forward. And I think that's really, really important. You have to acknowledge what has gone on. You have to acknowledge where the children have come from in terms of their life experience, but then you have to make a difference. I mean, I think probably the hardest bit for us, for all four of the children who we've had special guardianship, 3 girls and Callum, is that we have religiously kept in contact with families. Yeah. And that is a challenge in itself.
Absolutely.
And it's not easy all the time, but it grounds them as to where they are, and they really understand where they are in terms of their life story.
And it absolutely also builds a trust, doesn't it, with you? Because if you're working at understanding first and foremost their family life, their history, but also, you know, we've found that, you mentioned contact earlier, we frequently found that we often used to have to do the contact ourselves, and that contact allowed us to build the relationships of a sort with the parent, whoever they may have been. And that was a trust element for the child to begin to trust us, and the mother to begin, or the father to begin to trust us as well. And that was a really, really important. And it was often looked down upon by the social worker team that, no, you don't build the trust. You don't have anything to do with the families. And in fact, to this day, we still support many of our past foster kids and the family network around them, because you take on the child, you take on their history as well in many ways. And so I totally understand that. And I think that's a really important part.
Go on that, because I think there's another important part, which is really important, that actually that families, because of the role that the social workers are undertaking, assessing families and making judgments, families will not necessarily be as honest as they are to us as foster carers. And we stopped in March after 30 years, but, you know, for all that we said, the conversations with families shed a lot more light and a lot more colour on their lives, and we could understand why they got to where they are, which means when you share it with the children, it's much clearer than local authority life story workers who don't always get it right, because we have a different perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm just, another thing you touched on there, we found one of the things that we can't help, and we can't save every child that comes into our care. But the one thing that we have learned over the 20 years, and I'm sure you would concur with this as well, is you teach them that there's another way. You teach them that there's another way, that they have a belief and a trust that they can do things differently. And there's hope. That's the element that we always try and get across. Can I go in and touch in on where your FASD work came in then? How you mentioned earlier about Georgia and about the drinking, how you were asked to look into that. Tell us about that journey then, and where it took you.
The journey, and the one slide that I still use from some training I did in Ormskirk, which is in the north of England, which was the only FASD training in 2007 that I went to, was one that sets out that children with FASD have very significant delays in education, and maybe they will end up in prison, and they may well have sexualized behavior, and they may well be impulsive, and it gives a whole list of things. And my mind immediately went, well, this is looked after children. And I believe then that the level in the looked after and care experienced population was huge in comparison to the rest of children who are in care. And subsequently, that's been proved the case. I think probably in England, but also around the world, that's the case. And when you start to understand it, now I was fortunate that I was in Peterborough, and Cora and Bath have published some work that we did in Peterborough in the journal that they did, which was an FASD journal, and Jez Gregory looked at the numbers of kids with FASD in the in-care population in 1 year. So within my virtual school, we worked together and we looked at the number of children. And for many people, it's an academic study. I can still see the faces because they're the kids that kept me awake, seriously kept me awake, and I still can see the faces. Because at the end of that piece of work, there was 27% of my virtual school, then only 320 kids, but there was 27% who had FASD. And we also did the same for adoption, and we couldn't do a diagnosis because they'd moved on, but we looked at those that had been exposed to alcohol in the womb, and 75% had, who were then moved on to adoption, which, when you start to think about it, is quite logical, because they tended to be the younger children who were removed very early on in their life because of drugs and alcohol problems. And I think subsequently we've proved that actually those figures are really high.
And we've spoken to various other people on our webinars, and we've discussed also the similar sort of figures that we're believed to be in the criminal justice system, in the foster care system as well. And
the other side, I'll say that we haven't got any stats on, but I wholeheartedly believe that we've got it in the special education far more than mainstream. Certainly anecdotally, the school where my son used to go to, out of 83 kids last term, has had 20 kids who had or were likely to have FASD. So we're looking at about a quarter of the kids in that particular SEMH, social, emotional and mental health school as well.
It's these figures. I mean, we are craving, aren't we, data in this country, Absolutely. Prevalence studies, a really significant prevalence study to be able to access, because we had this discussion today in one of our conferences. We are really struggling to get engagement from the government on this. They're working at all their other policies on trying to work with gambling, working with smoking cessation, working with so many other areas, and yet FASD is something that they will not even touch at the moment.
It's really interesting. You see, the Department of Health did the needs analysis in September 21, which looked at a number of things, including the need for an in-detail prevalence study, because we've only got the work out of Salford, which showed in 3 schools in the year 3 classes that it was about 2 to 4% who had FASD. And now what we need to push is the Department for Health is calling for a much bigger study in England, so we know how big it is. My MP as a constituency MP is Steve Barclay, who some of you on here will know is the Health Secretary. Some of you won't know that, but he's in charge of the Department of Health for England. Now, we managed to get, Georgia and I managed to get a conversation with him about FASD off the back of what the investment was being put into smoking, trying to make the case that actually as only 19% of women admit to smoking when they are pregnant, compared to over 40% of women who record that they drank during pregnancy, that it was much more dangerous to be drinking, and tried to get him to admit to or to say what investment he'd put in. If we look at parliamentary answers from 2016, which was the first time the chief medical officer said that the only way to be safe in pregnancy or when you were trying to get pregnant was not to drink, the government in England have spent no money at all on getting that message across. And that is the problem. And that is a real problem because, for 8 years, the message is still mixed.
Yeah. And you sat on the all-party parliamentary group on FASD as well, didn't you? And there was a real sense that there was movement.
There was.
Things were moving on.
Yes. And it's been incredibly difficult post-COVID, Brexit and things to actually get them to re-engage. In 2018, in December, my daughter said, well, when are you going to Parliament again? And I'd not thought about it, but in 2018, we'd been in 8 times.
Yeah.
And since then, since COVID lockdown, we haven't been to Parliament.
Well, I know we had Bill Esterson on as well, and he was saying the way Parliament goes, people that are supporting an idea or a plan moving forward, you get your sides together. Many of them lost their places in Parliament, and so therefore you have to build up those relationships again. And he was saying that, to each and every one of us, write to your MP, make it an issue, write to them, put it on their agenda. I'm
going to do it more than once.
Absolutely.
to get in to talk to our MP, the Health Secretary, very busy man, I was told by, took about 3 years.
Yeah.
And that included saying, well, look, we're in Parliament and Georgia's there. Would you like to come and talk to her? And we were given 15 minutes. We took 40 minutes of his time because we thought we were owed that.
I think so too.
And that was only because he's our MP, not because he was the Health Secretary.
Yeah. Very interesting. I'm going to move on, if I may, and talk about how I had a really interesting question that was put to me this morning. And what does a best FASD family day look like to you? And then by contrast, what does the worst FASD family day?
Wow, that's an interesting question, isn't it? The best one is one where I guess everything goes to plan, that you've actually explained to the young people. And we have 3 with FASD in this household. So that is quite a tall order. We know that children with FASD really benefit from one-to-one. It gets a bit difficult when there's 2 of you and 3 kids. So that becomes quite difficult. So I think ours is where there is no pressure, that we can run at the pace and speed that the children need. I've got 2 adults. I've got a 24-year-old and a 21-year-old. So not.
Yeah.
So, taking an example, holiday can be quite hard. And I know that last time I went to Mallorca with Callum and the girls, I didn't do half I wanted to do because we just took it at their pace, and that worked really well. Now, you can do that on holiday. You can also go to, even though you were on a half board, you can still go to McDonald's 5 times because it's the same sort of food.
Yeah.
But there we go. But you can't really do that when you're not on holiday. There's other time constraints that come in that control you. So the worst days are when people just don't get it, and they think they're being helpful, and they step in school, previously in social care, and they just will stir things up. And you might have to unpack a situation that's developed over 3 or 4 hours at the end of school, or after a meeting with a social worker or something like that. And those are the worst because it tests the kids' trust of yourself, because they've had something negative happen to them, which usually you've said isn't going to happen.
Yeah. there are many people on here that, you know, we've all, over the years of working in FASD, we have insights that we just pick away at, and, you know, discoveries on a daily basis that we think, oh, eureka, we've found a little way through something, a little nugget that's going to help us. And then the very next day we use that nugget again and it's completely defunct. Now, can I ask, is there a strategy that you discovered early on your own, not that it was given to you, but a strategy that you discovered on your own that you thought, hey, this worked, and then you've used it again and it worked again? And it might have been something that you had to adapt the way you parented. This is something that we frequently have to deal with, but it could be anything.
I think it's really hard because I think the key is the adaptation of our parenting styles. And I think the way that we live our lives, and many people with FASD live their family lives, are so alien to other people because we do it so differently. And it's hard to see how we do it because things creep up on you and you just adapt your behavior. So things like, I can't remember of Christmas meals we have sitting at the table, but anything else we probably don't have that because it's just too much pressure. You know, the kids will have funny tastes in their mouths, won't like how someone else is eating over the table, want to fidget, want to be on their iPads, and it just doesn't work. And, you know, that's a silly, stupid example, but sometimes you're judged against that. You know, I think what I find in terms of supporting loads of people with their children with FASD is how judgmental the system is.
Yes.
And doesn't take into account that actually we're playing a much, much longer game than anybody else in teams around the children. You know, our kids are not going to be handily in a primary school and get to a stage, or secondary school, or over the course of social services. We're playing a much longer game, and therefore the stage we play to is very different to their chronological age. And that judgment is quite difficult to make.
I totally agree. I think that brings up another area that I wanted to tap in on, and that was, I had been for some years of a governor of a primary school as the SEN governor, and we went through 3 different SENCOs because we discovered that the SENCOs only had about a week's worth of special educational needs training. And whereas a classroom teacher would have probably a day of SEN teaching in the process of their learning how to teach. Now, as a teacher yourself, you will understand that, and understand probably more than most the need for greater level of training of SEN in the classroom situation. Now, how do you approach a professional as a parent with a child with complex needs and behavioral issues, primarily with FASD? How do you approach a professional that knows very little about FASD, and you have to somehow diplomatically educate them about what you need and what you know you need, and they're not forthcoming? How do you deal with that?
Really hard, because I mean, I think people will know some of the things that I've done in terms of all the training I've done, the national perspective I have, the people I talk to at the highest level. And yet, when you're a parent, all that doesn't count.
Yeah.
So the thing that made it easiest for me was when we moved from Bedford to Chatteris, from Cambridgeshire, where we are now. And by fluke, and it is a huge fluke, our GP isn't a doctor with a child with FASD. And the primary school head isn't a doctor, guess what, with a child with FASD.
Wow.
No, I've never met anyone else that had that, but health and education. I didn't have to go in and go, and we think this is George, and we think she's got FASD, and that means that, which all of us do, because actually, in that case, Shireen went, well, I know about that. But even Shireen, who's our GP, when she's training at the Royal College of GPs, has been told not to admit she's a parent. And that really irritates me an awful lot, not because that's what she chooses to do, but because the whole lived experience that we have as parents is kind of pushed to the side. And that really irritates me, because, you know, if we take Raj Mukherjee, who I've got a lot of time for, and I was talking to him today, he doesn't have that lived experience.
Mm.
You know, he talks to people like me, and I think probably yourself, Andrew,
Mm.
about what it's like to live with people with FASD, because he doesn't actually have that.
And he is always, I know when we've had him on here the number of times, and when we do training with the community paediatricians down here in the southeast, one of the things he always does is bring in that lived experience to be able to talk to the paediatricians, because he understands as well that there is nothing more important than hearing it from the grassroots level. This is what it is like to live with it, and so therefore it cuts through more than anything else. And we saw Georgia presenting at the Salford conference with great eloquence. I've mentioned it on this webinar before, but one of the greatest moments for me was everybody gave that lovely group of young women that were presenting, gave them the time to come up with their answers. That was a room that understood how to communicate with FASD. They gave them the space. Most other places, there would be awkward silences where somebody would jump in and intercede on their behalf. They didn't. It was left for them to have the time to be able to say their words. And I thought that was so telling, but that was in that room with people that understand. We've got to get that message across to the wider community. But that had a huge impact when those young women spoke their experience of their, me and my FASD. They gave their beautiful, eloquent explanation. And that was really important, wasn't it?
It is really important. Everything we've done since lockdown, in all the stuff behind me here, has been grounded in a team of adults and young people with FASD, and they have given us the steer. So we always consciously either have them on our training, have them at launches of things we do, or have them on video. When I take Georgia on my training as my own personal training, they'd much rather talk to her because she is incredibly eloquent. It's not something that's come quickly, because she was talking to trainee doctors from Cambridge University in the GP surgery when she was 8. I used to do a bit about parenting, and then she'd come in after school and chat to the trainee doctors when she was 8. She's 21 now. She will tell you, and my 24-year-old will tell you, I didn't get it when I was at school. I didn't understand what FASD is. They're just really understanding it now. And George is really eloquent. She does know the stuff really, really well. Callum, my 15-year-old, when you're in meetings with him and you try to draw him out and you go, how does the FASD impact you? And he will just shrug his shoulders, because he still hasn't got his head around it.
Yeah.
Although he's had his diagnosis for 7 years or so, something like that.
And this is something we run, monthly friendship groups for individuals with FASD as well, at FASD Awareness, and they're all online. And we have a teen group and we have an adult group, and they're hosted by Maggie May, also with FASD. And so these friendship, they build these bonds. But when they first come in, they're so cautious, because having that relationship, building those bonds, building a confidence to be able to trust the other people in that room and have the time to be able to feel comfortable. Because in a school environment, I've got a question here that I thought was quite telling. And it was, do you think children with FASD are truly given the correct understanding, support, and opportunity to speak about their condition in a school environment, and even in an EHCP?
In a school environment, no. I don't think so. We have a few young people around the country who have gone out of their way to do that, but not in as much as we would want to that. Even in an EHCP and EHCP review, it's really difficult, because even as a 15-year-old, Callum in his year 11 struggles to understand how it fully impacts him. It's his life as he goes on, and that's how he sees his life. His impulsivity, his innate fairness, feeling that he's been treated quite badly. And I think the problem is that, and I think the most telling thing I had, and I've been talking to this family as well, we're special guardians and we're in Cambridgeshire, and I got a helpline request to support another family in Cambridgeshire, which turns out they're literally 3 miles up the road in a village up the road. Also special guardians, also with a girl the same age as Georgia, also at the same school with Georgia at the same time. And I was going in, and as people will imagine, I'm quite an awkward parent because I do know stuff and I'm not going to shut up. But I will go in, and I was talking to them about Georgia's FASD and her background and her life experiences, which was dire, and the supports that she needed to have in place. The grandparents up the road didn't have that level of understanding, and the school didn't pick up that the life story of both the one girl that I was supporting and my daughter was very similar, and their experiences ran parallel. And I came to support this young lady when she was 19, and she's in a much darker place, but also with grandparents. And the reason I'm trying to get help for them at the moment is that granddad is 83, he's in terminal cancer, grandmum is 78, and they're panicking about their 21-year-old and what's going to happen because, you know, she hasn't had the support and she just stays in a house.
This brings me on to another area which you've just alluded to it there, and that is the amount of special guardian families where the grandparents, there is so little support for grandparents that have individuals with FASD, and just being able to support them. They're desperate, they're exhausted as well. What advice could you give? You're going out there supporting this young lady that you identified that the family they're in desperate need as well, and she's in desperate need. What advice would you give a family with elderly parents, grandparents that are managing a young FASD individual?
I think it's trying to get as much support as we can, and that has been done with me, and we've taught the GP so they understand it. We have tried to engage adult social care. We've tried to support post-adoption care, but what they keep on getting hit with, and it's the conversation I had today, a series of forms that they have to fill in. Well, actually, they've got better things to do at this time of their lives than fill in forms to access services. Go out and talk to them. But it was a whole load of letters and abbreviations that they had no idea what they were.
Yeah.
And actually, the message that came to me was, please tell me what are these. I can't fill in the form, so I can't access any services. And I think, I've got my fingers crossed, we cracked that, but it was just translating what was there. So the whole point is and it's hard to try, when you know, to get as much support as you can in place and not to take no as an answer.
Yeah.
I think that's for all of us as parents. It's really hard.
Yes.
And it's much harder but parenting is hard.
And I agree. I think one of the points that you said there was also we really have to educate ourselves so that we understand and we use the right language when you're talking to the professionals, that the so-called professionals that don't understand the condition probably nearly as well. And even in schools, with staff, I don't blame staff for not understanding enough about it because there's just not the education for them. I know you're going into schools and working with schools as well. We're doing that and trying to work and with schools that have maybe a few individuals that they've been told, oh, we've got an FASD diagnosis in our Form 3 and we don't know anything about it. Can you come in and tell us? And then all of a sudden they're all, wow, we can see so many more kids throughout the school because all of a sudden we've identified this. Oh, so-and-so, so-and-so. And it's about educating people, isn't it? Educating from the parents to understanding the condition, how to manage those behaviors, because we always say that the parents are the FASD specialists. And so they have to go out and educate the professionals. Using the right language gives you a strength, gives you a voice. And as you say, you need to be like a bulldog chewing a wasp, don't you? You've got to go at these things and you don't accept no for an answer. So what
we've tried to do to help that, and it's in the last draft stage from something we did last month in FASD Awareness Month, was to get a booklet for parents, which can be run as a PowerPoint, it can be run as a hard book, which actually puts the national context as it stands now, with all the things from the nice quality standard, from the needs assessment and the current way of thinking, and then allows parents to input stuff about their own child. This is what helps them. This is what we find.
Yeah.
So instead of all the conversations that you and I have had and have had too many times as parents, they can go in with this booklet, and it's not quite ready to go yet because the people who came to our meeting were really good, but it gives them, it's not just Joe Blogg's, the mum and dad of Jenny saying it. It is actually, this is what the national picture is, and this is the child that you've got in front of you. Doctor, educationalist, club leader, dance leader, football coach, whatever. And it allows them to do that because we think that's what was missing. Having had to go in and learn all this stuff and regurgitate it to countless professionals.
Now, at the beginning of the year, we had high hopes that the nice quality standards was going to really open up a pathway for us all to be able to support and find that network of support, that scaffolding around our individuals. We knew that it was going to support and help the diagnosis process. I see a question on diagnosis here, and let me just send you to the webinar on our YouTube that we did with Raj Mukherjee. In there, he explains very clearly the process of diagnosis. So please do have a look at that. But we are looking at the management plans, aren't we? That's something that is so vital. What do you see at the moment, the difficulties that we're facing with the management plans, and what are the answers to those? Do you have any?
The management plan is something that is in the nice quality standards as the fifth target, the standard that they're aiming for, that every person with FASD should have a management plan which lasts throughout their life course. So it could be a little bit like what we have here in terms of an educational healthcare plan, but it's going to last much longer, and you're going to have to come in and assess all those needs. And we're acutely aware that when a child gets to 18, the rising 18, it becomes incredibly complex. And I think that's really the thing that has actually caused us, because then you get into employment, or you get into benefits, you get into housing, as well. You get in supporting them in relationships and where that can be. And in certain ways, when you're getting to that kind of age, or when they're at a stage where they can be thinking about those things, it's sometimes better that another person other than the parent is having that conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that becomes one of the big challenges. And therefore, to get enough teams integrated around that is going to be a real problem. And also who will take the lead in children who no longer have a social worker or never had a social worker. Who is going to take the lead? Because I can't really see it being a GP. I don't believe, for lots of reasons, that it should be the parents, but I would imagine it is going to be the parents that are going to have to lead. But that adds the problem that I was talking about those grandparents up the road from me here. That actually, what happens when you're not around or you're not able to do that?
Absolutely.
That's a worry of all of us, I think.
Absolutely. And it becomes an increasing worry as you get older yourself. And I think it becomes an increasing concern and adds anxiety for the individuals as well with FASD.
Certainly, Georgia is really worried that when we die, what is she going to do?
Yeah, of course.
Really, really worried about that. I have no intention of dying yet, but it's there in your back of your mind.
Of course it is. Of course it is. Let's move on, if I may, we spoke about the management plan. You have dealings with training up and down the country, looking at the integrated care system and educating the professionals in there, the commissioners. What's your experience been so far of different communities? Because it varies around the country, doesn't it?
In some areas, like up in Greater Manchester here, they are very much on the ball.
Very proactive.
Invested a lot of money into doing that. And an awful lot of training. Sheffield as well have just come through a big training thing and want more on FASD, because when you start to think about how many people are involved, it's a huge amount. Where I am here in Cambridge and Peterborough, they're still unfortunately scratching their head about actually, do we go down a neurodevelopmental pathway, which then branches out into ADHD, autism, trauma and FASD, or what way do we go? I know in Surrey, where Roger's based, that they tried the neurodevelopmental pathway and got swamped. And actually that's sort of bogged an awful lot down, simply because, as we know, there is so many neurodiverse people in our communities that if you open those gates up, it then becomes really hard to filter out into particular groups. And FASD always struggles because you haven't got the depth of knowledge about what people should be looking for. We have people every day in all of our communities who are professionals who are making assessments that would add up to an FASD assessment, because they're assessing for autism, they're assessing for ADHD. There's speech and language therapists going in, there's people doing sensory surveys, and teachers looking for the developmental delays. There's enough individuals that are doing all the assessments every single day of their working career. There's just not the overarching stuff to actually put it together, put the evidence of prenatal alcohol exposure together, and actually go, yeah, this is what it is. And that's where we're sadly at. I've seen very few reports yet coming from CCGs in terms of, from integrated care boards, from where they are on the nice quality standard. And obviously they're really meant to report every year.
Absolutely. And this is something that we're asking our families, question it. Question, what are you doing to support, to follow the nice quality standards? And I think there's a joined up thinking that is still not joined up. And it's a real problem. And I think it scares the living daylights out of them, to be frank, because they haven't got the answers. They haven't got the budgets, or they claim not to have the budgets. And so unless it's coming from the top down, it will not happen as far as we see it at the moment. We can keep fighting, and we will all keep fighting to try and make sure that this is brought through, the hard work and the battles that so many people put to making sure that management plan was included in those nice quality standards. And so it's crucial that we continue to fight to make sure that these are followed through. To move on again, if I may, to living with FASD. We always like to have the positives in this as well, because we're filled with this whole battling and doom and gloom, but there are so many positive aspects to FASD that I'd like to touch on. Now, Georgia and your family have all had a superb wraparound, understanding, support network to lead them to better outcomes in their life. And it's a great model on which to work. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to ask you some questions about it. You still have those really bad days.
Oh, yeah.
And
absolutely.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you manage those bad days? Because, you and your wife, you've been doing this for a very long time. And I know that to get to see my wife, it's a rare occasion. I'll sit and occasionally we'll watch some trash TV and I'll massage her feet and we'll not even talk. But our days have been frantic. How do you manage your situations when you've had those bad days, or even a good day? How do you manage your life around it?
I think the bottom line is that we kind of tag team anyway, to deal with either the good or the bad. So there's always one of us that, in theory at least, isn't as tired out as the other. So there's always one person there. Now that's quite a sweeping statement, I guess I think I've made, but it is about tag teaming. It's knowing our own strengths and knowing our own weaknesses and where we've got to go, actually, I can't deal with this because, and it is finding those bits, and then it is always finding the time. And as you say, it is nothing intellectual, because it It really wears you out. I think one of the most telling things for me was when I was working full time and with FASD, I couldn't really do that. But I would come home and I wouldn't have known what had happened at the end of school, that kind of meltdown from the pressure of school where kids had come in, because I'd come in 2 hours later and she dealt with it and the kids were relatively calm. And I think that was the kind of thing that actually those stresses were there, and just not understanding it because I didn't see it. And even the weekend, the pressures weren't there in the same sort of way. So it wasn't as high. But obviously when I tried all kinds of things in terms of condensed hours. So I was working a full week in 4 days, 4-day working until I decided, well, actually, I need to be able to still bring some money in, but work part-time. And then I did actually see the stress and the pressures, and it is playing to our strengths and actually knowing what's happening and knowing what the other one's doing. So it's all about communication.
And I think there becomes a subliminal communication as well, doesn't it? Yeah. Because I think certainly for my wife and I can sense when I need to intercede on something, and I will either just take one of our kids out and let's kick a football around that. And my wife's going, I'm trying to do dinner here. Yeah. And of course, when you're trying to do dinner, it's not just a normal dinner for everybody. It's 4 different dinners because you've got 4 different palates, 4 different tastes at 4 different times, because actually that one's really hangry at the moment and therefore needs to be fed right now. Otherwise they're going to lose it. And you're teetering on the edge, aren't you? Constantly. Yeah. And it's that reading telepathic empathy that you have to have. And it's teamwork. It is teamwork.
And that, because there will be people on here who are single parents, single carers, and that becomes the big challenge. And I know I support a lot of you who are single parents, and it is having that extended network. So therefore, at some time, it's not you get a break, but you get someone who knows about you, about your family, about FASD, that you can just, I hate the word, but offload to. You can just, it's like the support groups you run, I run, that actually doesn't solve any problems, because it really doesn't, but it's just people who know and get it and just share experience. And I think that's the point. And I think for those single carers, single parents, they need to be able to find those people, and that, if anything, is the most important thing to do. And I think because support groups are patchy all around the country, that's why what you do is so important. What the FASD UK Alliance does in parts is so important, that there are just people there who effectively can listen.
Yeah. And I think for us, one of the joys, and you must find this as well, when you have somebody that, I remember we went online first in lockdown, and that's where it escalated rapidly, 2000% more increase. And we ended up, some of those that were really struggling in lockdown, there were many kids that actually thrived in lockdown because of the routine, but the parents didn't. And so when you're dealing with the families that are learning strategies, and you've got others that have had that experience, and they educate other families from their experiences, and then years later, we had it today, years later, you've got a family that still attends the webinars, still attends the support groups, because they're able to give their experience. And it might be something about a sleep pattern, something innocuous, like just put a little over the light of the TV, just put a black bit of tape over it. And then somebody says, yeah, but that's no good because he knows that tape's over it, so we've got to take it out. he will peel it back. And somebody says, oh, I've got another solution for that. Tipp-Ex over the top of it and then paint it black, but do it subtly when he doesn't know. And so there are all these sort of things that there are a mine of really useful everyday information. And if you could put a booklet together of all these ideas, but the spectrum is so vast, and you must have this with your family, that every individual is an individual. you know, and the spectrum is so vast. So when you say you see an FASD individual, you see an FASD individual. That's the whole point, isn't it? Can you tell us about some of the examples of how completely different FASD is in your family?
Even within our family here, we've got three young people with FASD. And, you know, I'll be honest, with the 24-year-old, who's now 24, she came to us when she was 4. We missed it for an awful long time because her strategies to cope were to be compliant, to always try her best, and folded in with a lot of trauma and total unmet attachment as well. It was hard to unpick those things until it took a long way through, because her sister was the one who would be, and this is Georgia, who's not like it now, but would have been the one who would be always on the go. She would have been biting, she would have been throwing things, and she took our attention away from Jodie. And, you know, my wife and I'll tell us, we probably didn't do a very good service because we missed that. But of the 3 that are there with us at the moment, Jodie is doing the best. She's out now pet sitting for somebody out in the Cambridgeshire villages, where she will go out. They've gone away for 3 nights, and she'll be sitting with their dog in their house. So she's driven her car because she drives there. She's a self-employed dog walker and quite successfully takes, you know, 3 or 4 dogs out for a walk and then takes them back to their various owners. And that's because, I guess, dogs are more important to her because they don't judge her like human beings do. But she is a huge success. What she can't do, she couldn't get 3 meals to put in a microwave. We had to get them today. And I'd like some snacks, but I don't know what I want. We had to get those. So she'd got all the stuff for her own dog, which she's taken with her. That was all there, the dog food and the dog toys and everything and the bed. But actually for herself, she couldn't do it.
Yes.
And that's a scaffold she still needs.
And this is a question that we are frequently asked, and that particularly by young, hopeful parents, and that is, can an FASD individual live independently? And
yes, there's lots that are.
Yeah, absolutely.
What people have
can you give us some examples of that?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's lots. I mean, there's a lot that have struggled through their early 20s, and then as their brain seems to mature at a slower pace than others, are very successful parents. They're holding down jobs. They're holding down. They're either self-employed in very practical jobs, like the dog walking that Jodie's doing, like landscape gardening, those kind of things. Or what they're doing is they've got their own families, they've got their own children, they're parenting successfully, and they've got jobs where they've created a niche for themselves, where actually the part of the job is not the whole thing in a company, a retail shop or a leisure centre, but it is a niche which they could do really well. And with a supportive management in that thing, they've really thrived.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really, really the important thing, to know that our children can and do thrive with the right support and that extended support. And that's probably true of lots of kids with special needs as well, because, you know, my 40-year-old former foster daughter who has mild learning difficulties can thrive really well with the right support. And that really isn't FASD. That is.
Yeah. And last month we had RJ Formanak, who was diagnosed at the age of 46 with FASD. And it was understanding his diagnosis that really gave him a clearer picture of how to live his life more productively. It answered so many questions that he had about his previous behaviors and the misdiagnosis that he'd suffered in his life. And, you know, exactly what you're saying, there are very positive outcomes to be had, but it's understanding your support network, understanding the difficulties and the challenges that you face on a daily basis, but also really understanding the strengths that you have, that you can use those strengths to hold down a good job, a job that you enjoy. And that's what we all want, surely. Surely we all want to be able to do a job that we love most. And if you can find that job, all credit to you. I think
what we have to remember internationally, we've got still a low level of diagnosis of FASD. There are millions, I'm going to go millions with this, of people who are living a challenging life, but they're getting through it really well, who have been affected by prenatal alcohol exposure, but they don't even know it yet. So the thing that exercises George's mind quite a lot is, my life expectancy is only 34. And I'm going, no, it's not. There are millions of people who are in their 40s, 50s already, but they just don't know it. And actually that kind of really unhelpful research, because it's done on really, but it dwells on her mind. Not only that I'm going to die, but she's only got another 13 years or whatever. And that is not helpful.
Well, long may you educate people to the right the right methods, the right ideas, and understanding better FASD and how to live with FASD. Brian, thank you for all you do. We really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us tonight. Any questions that anyone has tonight, I will forward them on to Brian. And I hope we've answered most of them. I think if you go and have a look at our webinar series, there are now, Brian is our 20th in this series. So we have 20 enlightening webinars with some of the leading figures in the FASD community. Please do join us on that. Also, in the meantime, we are an organisation that we do this for free. We do not get any government funding. And so we'd love you to go to our website at FASD Awareness. And if you've enjoyed it, if you found it useful, just for the price of a cup of coffee, please donate something. It allows us to continue to do this and support our friendship groups and our family support groups. So I thank you very much for joining us tonight. Brian, once again, thank you and love to all the family. And I'll see you again soon. All the best.
Take care.
Thank you very much for joining us. Good night.